All right, we're both sides. So we're towards the bottom of Tosfos Dibra Masel Katan. Coming close to the finish line here of this Tosfos, this gigantic Tosfos. And we got up to Miud Kasha. So let me just note how many lines up this is from the bottom of the Amud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How do you like that? We have an opinion. Okay, I don't see Ellie tonight. Is he around? Okay, there goes my tea. Okay, Umiu Kasha. So let me give a little bit of an introduction to Umiu Kasha. Does everybody have the place?
Yeah.
Tosas earlier, about 15 lines earlier, had quoted a Sugyan Ezu Neshech. Now, this Sugyan Ezu Neshech is an attachment to Tosas' original kasha. Tosas had originally asked, how could Zachar Li'adam Shalom B'fanav apply to a Katan in the case of Gerus? How can we be Megaya the Katan through Zachir when right now he's a guy, and a guy doesn't have shlichus, not midaraisa, not even midrabanan, because the rabbanan are not going to establish shlichus on behalf of a guy, because he's never going to come b'chlal shlichus. He's completely excluded from shlichus. However, Tosas solves that problem by invoking a principle called Gito v'yado bon kachas, that it could be that at the moment that he needs to have a yad to be zochen his gerus and have a shliach, at that moment he's already a ger. So in other words, his gerus and his status as a bar hachi of shlichus and therefore of schia are both chal simultaneous. So that problem Tosas solves, but we still have another problem. Even if I grant you that we can see that this guy is undergoing a transformation and he's becoming a Jew, and therefore he's included in shlichus and in schia. But I have another problem. What's that? He's a katan. And if he's a katan, then the Gemara that Tosas quoted a little bit earlier here in Perek Ezu Neshech has determined that a katan doesn't have zechia, at least on a doraisa level. He may possibly have schia midrabanan, but on a doraisa level, the katan can't have schia because he's not a bar shlichus. And Tosas quotes two girsos there in the Gemara in Bava Metzia. According to one girsa, lesle schia midoraisa, and that would imply that maybe he has schia midrabanan. But there's another girsa that implies that he doesn't have schia at all. Period. Not even midrabanan. Now, if we accept the girsa that the Rabbanu were misakein shlichus on behalf of Katan, and therefore schia, which is mitam shlichus on behalf of Katan, then the entire enterprise of gerus for a Katan is a rabbinic enterprise, which is very, very strange, because the status of this ger Katan is that of a Jew for all dinim. He can marry a Jewish girl, he enters into the kahal, we can trust his shechita, he could be an aide and testify in a court of law. All dinim make him into a Jew. And Tosas says it's impossible to say that the Rabbana made him into a Jew, because even though the Gemara establishes in Yevamos that yesh koach b'yad chachamim lakar dov min Torah, that's only b'shev v'altas but not b'kuvaseh. And therefore Tosas is really in a bind. We cannot apply Zach and the other Shalom B'fanav to this Katan, because Zechia is mitam shlichus and a Katan doesn't have shlichus, therefore he doesn't have schia. And even in Afilim Timsa Lomer, that there is an institution of schia for a Katan midrabanan, that would imply that the entire enterprise of ger Katan is the Rabbanan, which is something that Tosas finds very, very unacceptable, to say the least. Therefore, Tosas comes up with a very sophisticated Hechetimta. How can we ever have a ger Katan? And it's a case of a Mu'uberes Shenis, meaning a non-Jewish woman who's pregnant, and she undergoes gerus, and her gerus is chal on behalf of herself and on behalf of the Uber at the same time. We had a long discussion about this because we thought this would depend, and at least Rabbi Kiva certainly thought it depends on the machlokas whether Uber Yerech Imo or Lav Yerech Imo. And if Uber Lav Yerech Imo, Rabbi Kiva understands that the Uber is a separate entity, a gavra unto himself, and he needs his own gerus. And then the mother would have to be a shliach on behalf of her Uber in order to generate gerus. And that was Rabbi Kiva's understanding that we're back to square one, because once again, we have Zach in the Adam Shalom B'fanav, which doesn't apply to a Katan. Again, we quoted Reb Chaim at great length. We're not going to go into it tonight. That the machlokes, whether Uber Yerech Imo or Lav Yerech Imo, is not relevant at all to this sugya. Thank you so much. Because even if you hold Uber Lav Yerech Imo, that's only as far as Gufim are concerned. Then Gufim Mechulakim. And therefore, the Uber would need his own Masechet Tefillah. But as far as Gavra is concerned, we prove from the Gemara in Yevamos that it's one Gavra. And that's why if you had twins that were born to this Kiyoresh and Yemuberes, they would be related for all Dini Arayas as if they was two Achim. For Yibum, and they couldn't marry the wife of one of them, so forth. Anyway, so to make a long story short, the bottom line here is that according to the Gemara in Masechet of Metzia, in Perkei Zu Neshech, there's no such thing as Chia on behalf of Katan on a Doraisa level. And then we're stuck with the Gemara in Ksubis. The Kosher, Miu Kosher. Me'ahi, the Perikamid Ksubis, the Amrinon, Ger Katan, Matbilino so al das Bezdin. Now, what does that mean? Bezdin could be Megaira Katan. And ostensibly, what principle would be operating here? Zachin li Adam Shalom B'fanav. Correct? That Bezdin are now, because they're convinced it's a schus to be a Jew, they never accepted the Yiddish idiom is Shvetzes out of Yid. And therefore, to the extent that it's a schus, Zachin li Adam Shalom B'fanav. But now we're in deep trouble. Because if Ger Katan Matbilon Sal Das Bezdin, because it's a schus and Zachin li Adam Shalom B'fanav, put that together with the Gemara in Bava Metzia that there's no such thing on a Doraisa level, at least, of Zachin L'Katan. So then how could this Gerus be Chal Doraisa? And then again, we're back to where we were at the very beginning, that this Gerus would have to be D'Rabbanan, and then we're going to have to invoke the principle of Yesh Koch B'Yad Chachamim, Lak or Dogman Atar, but here it'll be Bekum Vasei, to marry him off to a Jewish girl, etc., etc. How could this be? And yet the Gemara says, L'chol bili, for all dinim, chashiv ger. Latira b'bas Yisrael, kiddush of kiddushin, umin after he's mekadosh and isha. If someone would have a relationship with his wife, he would be chayav misa. And ban of cholzin u'miyabmin is yibum, u'l'chol mili doraisa. For all dinim doraisa, he has the status of a Jew, of a ger. How could this be if Zachin L'Katan is only the Rabbanan? How could Zachin Yom Shalom B'fanav, when Bezdin is Megaira Katan, apply to generate Geras Doraisa? The entire institution of Ger Katan is now on the line. And Tosfos is saying that it makes no sense unless you're talking about, again, a case of a Goyim Muberes. But the Gemara is talking about Ger Katan Shabbat Bilon Saldas Bezdin. The Gemara is not talking about a Muberes. How could that Geras be effective? V'lo mashma sheyehi mitam yesh koch b'yad chav lakar domin Torah chad adari bili b'shevi al taseh v'hai kum v'aseu. This is a case of kum v'aseu. So that's question number one of Tosfos. Now we get to question number two of Tosfos. The Ode, if you look at the Gemara Ksubis on Daf Yud Aleph, the Gemara asks the following question: the Mandiomar who says that Ger Katan Matbilon Sal Das Bezdin is Rav Huna, and the Gemara objects, why did Rav Huna have to tell me something that I know on my own from an explicit brisa? Tmina Zachin li Adam Shalom B'fanav. The Gemara is outspoken that the din of ger katan bilo sal das bezdin is predicated on what principle? Zachin li'adam shalom b'fanav. To the extent to which the Gemara says, why did Rav Huna have to bother telling me that ger katan bilo sal das bezdin? What's the chiddush? Michael Mashal on? We have it explicitly in a brisa that says that zachin li'adam shalom b'fanav. Ad kan kushas hatosos. And Venera is going to be the answer of Tosfos. So if you don't mind, let's just summarize Tosfos' problem. Tosfos combines two different sugyas and ends up with a kasha. Sugya number one is Ezu Neshech B'Metzia, the maskana to which is that a katan cannot have schiyah. Why not? Because the chiyah's mitam shlichus, and a katan can't have shlichus. If there is such an entity as zachin lekatan, it's only what? B'derabbanan. And the Rabbanan established schiyah on behalf of katan because a katan eventually will be included in shlichus when he becomes a god. They didn't do so in the case of a guy, because he'll never be included in shlichus.
Is that the exclusive understanding of the Qiyah, or was it only Ezer Neshech understanding? So, is there any other understanding?
It could be there is such an understanding, but it's not Tosfos. I mean, Tosfos from the beginning of this Tosfos to the end, always right, because the Gemara, you see, we're quoting the Gemara super stuff Yudal, but if you look at Bab Metzia Daf Yudal, the Gemara says explicitly that Tzchi is Mitam Shlichus. What is Zachin Li'adam Shalom B'Fanav? How is it different than Shlichus? There's only one difference. You don't need what? Minui. In the absence of minui, we apply the principle of zachin, correct? Because it's a schos. So there's a self-appointed shlichus in zachin, but it's definitely based on shlichus because what happens in zachin? There's a mezakeh and there's a zochet. The mezakeh implements the ma'isa kinyan or kiddushin or gerushin on behalf of whom? On behalf of the zochet. Well, how could one person act on behalf of someone else? Today we have in modern contemporary life, we have something called a notary public. But what's the equivalent of a notary public in halacha? A shliach. So the schiyah is really shlichus. It's another way of expressing shlichus, with one difference, and that is we don't need to be mamana. And now we're saying that if schiyah is built on shlichus, and a katan can't have shlichus, a katan therefore can't have schiyah. Is that clear?
Yeah.
But that's. When I was in college, I took a course in logic that was called modus tollens. I don't know if anybody knows what that is. All right, it doesn't matter. But let's just say it again.
You read this.
Shlichus is predicated on what?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, schiyah is predicated on what? On shlichus. A katan could not have shlichus. Therefore, a katan cannot have schiyah. That's called modus tollens. Okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah, that's syllogism, exactly. So now we have a serious problem. The Gemara definitely establishes that Bezdin can be Magaira Katan based on what? Zachin Li'adam Shalom B'Fanav. In fact, the Gemara is so convinced that Zachin Li'adam Shalom B'Fanav should operate here that the Gemara asks Pshita Ma'ikam Mashmalon. That's question number one. How could Zachin Shalom Li'adam Shalom B'Fanav apply in the case of a Katan to generate gears? And you'll tell me, wait a minute, maybe this ger is only a ger d'Rabbanan, and you're going to be Masada Kiddushin on behalf of this ger. And if somebody has a relationship with his wife, he's chayav misa. Okay, yesh koch b'yad chacham, lakar dam min Torah. Just like they can tell you don't take a shofar on Rosh Hashanah if it falls on Shabbos. But what's the answer? That's only b'shevi alta said. But Pekuva say we're not going to establish that the Rabbanan have that authority to change the Torah law. This child is a guy. And that's how the Torah recognizes the child as a guy. And now you're going to treat the child as a yid? How can you do such a thing? But now Tosfos asks another question. The ode, see if I can find the place here, sorry. The ode, Mida Parach, Maika Mashlin Tanina. What's the Chiddush of Ger Katan Vino Soda, especially we have a brisa explicitly. Now, what kind of business is this? Pshita Maika Mashmal. We're talking about Schil Katan. Okay, very nice that the Brisa says explicitly Zachar the other Shlo B'Fanav. But that only applies to a Gadol who has Shlichus, not to a Katan who's a Labar Shlichus. So what did the Gemara mean when it said Pshita my Kamashma? Okay, now we get to Venira. Now I'm going to claim that this Venira is a revolution of sorts. This is the Parshas Drachim, in which Tosas changes our whole understanding of Ger Katan. And the bella to me is that this Tosas doesn't appear in Masechet Ksubos. That's where I think it would belong, but it's right here, tucked away for our benefit here in Alon Shvut in Perek Ben Sorah.
So who is the Tosas might be?
What do you say?
When they took the Tosas, the Tosas always grasp one thing and then they just publish it, or was it?
I'm not sure if you're asking historical questions.
Yes, yes.
Okay, you're asking the wrong guy. Venira. Is everybody ready for this? I should be sitting here, not standing. I'll fall from my feet. Venira.
On suspense.
Zchia de Gerus. Lo dami l'shar zchios. Interesting. So we have what you might call a general halach of Zachin Li'anam Shlo B'Fanav, and then you have a specific type of Zachin Li'anam that operates in only one area of halach. And what's that? Gerus. And why? The Masha Bezdin Matbilin also Einam Zochim Bavuro. So I'm going to ask you to underline those three words. What does it mean? Einam Zochim Bavuro.
They're not doing an act that's going to be attributed to him, like another shlichus.
Excellent. Elahu Zocha Bi'atzmo Ubegufo Naseger V'nichnas Tachas Kanfei Ashkin. Who jumps into the mikvah?
Nobody doesn't jump.
Okay. Who does Mila? Is it Bezdin that's doing the Mila on his behalf? Is Bezdin doing the Tefillah on his behalf? That would be classic Zechia, because classic Zechia equals Shlichus. And what's Shlichus? When the Mishaleach sends a Shliach, the Shliach does the action on behalf of the Mishaleach. And in the case of Zechia, the Mezakeh does the action on behalf of the Zocha. That's not what happens here in Gerus. Bezdin is not doing an action of Mila and Tefillah that's going to relate to the Katan. The Katan itself is in the mikvah. All right, you don't like jumping? Okay, he's in the mikvah, right? And the Katan himself is going to undergo Mila. So basically, what is Tosa saying? There are two dinim of Schia. One of them applies universally in Kalatar Kula, and the other one applies in a very specific way in Gerus. And this din of Schia is radically different than the classic Schia. The classic Schia could not apply to a Katan. Why not? Because Katan doesn't have Shlichus. And Schia means that the Mezakeh does the Maaseh on behalf of the Zocha. Admittedly, without being appointed, but at the end of the day, it is shlichus. I mean, schia is just another word for shlichus. The mechanics is identical, with the one exception, the fact that you don't need minui. And that could not apply to a katan because a katan can't send a shliach. But, says Tosas, this is a chia that operates with regard to gerus, and it's radically different because we're not applying the maisa of the mezakeh related to the zocha. Because at the end of the day, who's doing the Maisa Gerus? The Katan himself. It's not the Bez that does the Maisa Gerus, and then it has to relate to whom? To the Katan. The Katan himself does the Maisa Gerus. So on both sides, what is basically Tosa saying here about the Schia of Gerus?
It's not Zechia.
It's not Schia Mitam Shlichus, because Schia Mitam Shlichus means we have to set up the Maisa and make sure the Maisa relates to the Mishalech, or in this case to the Zocha. Here we don't have to relate the Maisa and the Mezak and any Bezdin to the Katan, because the Katan himself personally, Begufo, Naseger, Bemilu Tefillah. And therefore, it's a new Zechia. And this Zechia is not predicated on what? On Shlichus. What is the purpose of this Zechia? What is the goal and the mechanics of this Zechia? What does it accomplish? It's not to relate the Maisa of the Masechet to the Zocha. That we don't need here in Geirus. But rather what? What do we need in Geirus? We need Das. The Katan doesn't have Das. So we need to supply the Das on behalf of the Katan. And that we can do through what? Parsha? Through what mechanics? What principle? Zechia. But not the Zechia that's classic Zechia. Not the Zechia that's predicated and stands on the shoulders of Shlichus, but a brand new Parsha of Zechia without Shlichus that simply allows us to be Mezaka on behalf of the Zocha, and we are going to be Mezaka in the Das of Geirus. This is an unbelievable breakthrough in Tosfos. And therefore Tosfos says, Elahu Zocha B'yatzmo, Ubegufo Nasa Ger, V'nichnas Tachas Kanfi Yashchina, he is a Ger. And what kind of Geirus are we talking about? Is it a rabbinic Geirus? There ain't no such thing, says Tosfos. What kind of Geirus are we talking about? Full-fledged Geirus Doraisa. This Katan is a full-fledged Jew for all dinim, for Arayas, for Kedushin, for Geirushin, for Yevamis, for Eidas, for I don't know what. He could be an aid b'chol Eid Yisrael. And why is it Chal? Because it's not predicated on Shlichus. It's only to supply the Das on behalf of the Katan.
Don't they, when he's 13 or don't they?
So wait a minute, I gave you a homework assignment last week. I told you to read the Tosfos. You wanted to, so you punted for the homework assignment. Anyway, that discussion is going to come up almost immediately, but first we have to add one thing, and then we'll get to that discussion about Higdili.
I'm just trying to say that it goes very well because the whole thing is so you have to make sure they have the Das. But you know, so then you
correct. And the halacha of Zachil Yom Shalom B'fanav means that right now we have every reason to believe it's a schus, but we have to check it out. Maybe he'll tell you it's not a schus for me. He'll come forward, step forward, declare this is a chova for me. And if it's a chova, then the entire mechanics of schia limafreya is completely batal mavuta because we were working with a mistaken assumption. So as soon as the zocha finds out about the schia, he can say, I don't want it. You know, like, again, Balabatis, we have a pasuk that says, right? Or sorry, so you are mezaka on my behalf with a great matana. And I say, you know what? I don't want it. Thank you. But no, thank you. I don't want this extra burden. It's like my goal in life is not to have to drive a car. Everybody has their own vision of what Gan Eden looks like. Gan Eden has no cars. Okay, but in order to get to Alon Shvut, I have to drive a car here. How long does it take to get average to this shir from Dagan, which is less than 6 kilometers?
Depends what time of day.
Well, you know when I come, I come 15 minutes early to set up my computer. An average of anywhere between 30 and 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, and that's on a good night. Okay. Meanwhile, I'm looking to my left, to my
I hope we
right.
make it worth it for you, man.
Who are the automobiles to my left and my right? I check out the license plates, and most of them I can't even read what it says on the license plates. Okay, so we won't get into that because in Hasidus there's something called Yiros Nefulos. Have you ever heard of that? Okay, these are fears that are antithetical to Bitachon. Okay, but do me one favor: if I ever come late for Shir, really late, call up my wife, or maybe call up Ichud Atzol. I don't know who to call. Anyway,
but
The police.
okay. Is there not other scenario where you can just be Mazaka the Das? In other words, in transactions with payments and other things, saying because
in contemporary life, you're talking?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
in halacha?
Halacha.
Oh, in halacha, how?
If the mafilin, because he's doing the whole action, and the only thing that's being transferred is something mental and not something physical.
Right.
Therefore, you say that it's the Rasa's here, not a Rabbanan's here. So if you give someone the property, you give the customer the right to buy something or right to do something, and you're just transferring your das, then that's
Right,
also
but
be
in
on das.
Kinyono, no, with Kinyono, we need a Maisa Kinyon. So we have to operate with Shlichus, and Schia Mitam Shlichus doesn't work for a Katan. Are you with me? In other words, the only time that we're going to operate with Zechia on behalf of Katan is when there's no Maisa that's necessary, or any Maisa that's necessary was done by the Katan himself. I don't know of another case that fits that profile. But let's leave that for the time being, because again, the clock is our worst enemy. And I'd like to see what we can accomplish tonight, okay? So what does he say over here? He has a problem now. The hard parach b'ksubis, Tanina, Zachin li'alo shlo b'fanav. The Gemara says, Pshita my kamashmalon, isn't this Zachin li'alo shlo b'fanav? What answer would you have given if you were Ravina or Ravashi authoring the Gemara?
This is not Zach.
What was the Havamina?
That it works becomes Zechia.
That Zachin li'alo shlo b'fanav could not apply over here. Why not? Because he's a Katan. Kamashmalon, that this Schia is different than every other Schia. And it could operate even on behalf of Katan, because all we need is to supply the das, but we don't need to transfer the Maisa. But the Gemara gives a whole nother answer. Umeshani, Mauditem, I would have thought, Oved Kochavim Beth Kera Nichole. Maybe it's better to be a guy than to be a Jew, because why not live the life of Keras? I mean, nobody asked you or obligated you to become a Jew. So now, Tosas is asking, I think, the following question. If Gerus does not work with classical Zechia, so at this point, the Gemara is talking about Mao de Tema, maybe it's a Chova. Who cares whether it's a Chova or not? Do we understand Tosas' Kasha? We'll see his answer in just a second. Tosas doesn't understand. If we really have obviated, we've circumvented the entire parsha of Zechia as we know it, that the Mezakah does the Maisa on behalf of the Zocher through Shlichus. But now we're talking about a whole different mechanics. We're talking about the fact that we supply the das. So Tosas says, if we supply the das, what kind of Havamina is it? Okay, it's better to be a guy than it is to be Yisrael. But that's not relevant to us. That would be relevant if you want to know whether it's actually a schus or not. But if you're not operating with Zechia mitam shlichus, and if there's a new parsha of Zechia, then what's the difference between Chova and not Chova?
It's a moral question.
Say it again.
I think it's a moral question. I think it doesn't say.
I didn't hear that word. What question?
Moral.
Moral question.
Yeah, that's what doesn't say anything. I'm saying that.
Well, maybe that's going to be Tosas' answer, but I'm in the Havamina Tosas. What is bothering Tosas? The answer is going to be Hainu Mishum, blah, blah, blah. But before we get to Hainu Mishum, you have a question mark here. There's something bothering Tosas. Do you have the Biuri Tosas in the back of your of Masechet? Do me a favor, see if he points anything out. What exactly is bothering Tosas?
It sounds like the only chiddush here is that becoming a Jew is a schus. According to Tosas' theory, there's much bigger chiddush here. There's a whole new institution of Zechia.
No, you're right, David. I'm not arguing with you. The Gemara is very difficult because why couldn't the Gemara find an answer to the question? But Tosas is asking a different question. Tosas is asking a question. Let me just get the. Tosas is asking the question about Oved Kochavim Befkera Nichole. And somehow Tosas doesn't understand why that should be relevant until he comes up with the moral issue that you mentioned before. But
why can't it be that he's asking just why is this even a discussion? Well, what's the whole discussion that the Gemara is saying that there's no chiddush here, and the only chiddush is that maybe you would be Befkera Nichole. That there's a much bigger chiddush here that there's a whole new concept of Zechia.
But David, again, you're not. No, again, you'll be mochel me if I say these words.
Sure.
You're not reading the Tosas properly.
Okay.
Be mochel me for saying. Because who am I to say that to you? You're a bigger Talmud than I am. But what I'm saying is that if you look at Tosas is vacillating back and forth about this whole principle of Ovei Kochov Befkeren Nichle. He doesn't understand why the Gemara is pushing Ovei Kochov Befkeren Nichle, meaning it's irrelevant. The Tosfos is going to say why it's relevant. He's going to answer that question. He's not asking our question, namely, what does the Gemara mean by Pshita Kamashmal? It's not Pshita at all. You're introducing a whole new chapter, a whole new parsha of Zechia that's not operating with the same rules and the same mechanics of classic Zechia. But that's not what Tosfos is asking. Tosfos is asking a different question. He doesn't understand what is this whole business about Ovei Kochov Befkeren Nichle. And I suspect, Rabbosai, that Tosfos at this point is not operating midin Zechia. If he was operating midin Zechia, then the Gemara is making an excellent point. When does Zechia operate?
Only if it's a schus.
Only if it's a schus. So the Gemara says, well, I don't know. Is it a schus or is it not a schus? So let's go back and forth and figure that out. That would be perfect, and the Gemara makes sense. But Tosfos didn't understand it that way. Tosfos understood that there's some new method, some new principle that's operating here that allows for this gerus to take place even if it's not a schus, even if there's no schia.
That's how the Be'eri had Tosfos in the Gemara.
That's what he has there. Oh, Baruch Hashem. Let's see it inside. Okay, I'm not trying to steal it from the Biri Tosfos here. This is unbelievable. We are going so far now. The revolution is now entered into a more advanced stage. We thought the revolution was that within the Parsha of Zechia, there are two categories of Zechia. But what's common to both categories of Zechia? It's got to be a schus. Now we're breaking new ground. We're saying that Bezdin, in the context of Ger Katan Bilunos al Das Bezdin, it's not Zechia at all. It's not operating these din Zochli Olav Shalom Fire. And therefore, what's nafkamina? We don't need what? We don't need that a piece schus. You're late playing. And the Gemara is going to insist that if we were to hold that akum befkeren nichale, and it's not a schus, then the entire parsha of Ger Katan Bilunos al Das Bezdin would fall apart. And Tosfos doesn't understand why. Are you with me, Rabbosai? Do you see what Tosfos is fighting against? He's fighting against the requirement of schus in the case of gerus of Katan, because Tosfos is of the opinion that we have completely circumvented the entire parsha of Zechia, and we're not operating within Zechia. We can somehow magically, since the guy himself, the Katan himself, is going into the mikvah and he is doing the meal in begufo, is nasager b'nichnas tachas kanfi hashchina, and we're going to do this on his behalf. We're going to supply the das that's necessary for gerus, and I couldn't care less whether it's a schus or a chol.
Is that only applied by gerus?
I don't know. Again, we're back to your question from before. I don't know of another case.
A guy accept the chol on his behalf. I took it on his behalf. What do you mean? You say, what are we talking about? I don't know whether the chol. No, I don't care. I don't care whether or not you're Zoycha. I'm accepting a chol on your behalf.
Oh, so I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. So let me reformulate Ellie's question. Is there any precedent to somehow step in, give das on behalf of someone else in a case of a chova? Is there any precedent for that? Or to formulate it in a different way, what is the chalos gerus here? How does the chalos gerus operate? And I think what Tosfos is saying is that Bezdin can create gerus on the part of the Katan as long as it's not against his will. In other words, as we'll soon see, he has the right to say, well, I don't want this gerus. He has a right to say, this is bal karcha, you're forcing it down my throat. But let's say in the case where he doesn't say that, and we're in a situation where, well, yeah, maybe it's nichale, maybe it's befkera, maybe it's a schus, maybe it's a chova, we don't know what it is. We can be megayer him al das bezdin, says Tosfos, magically, and we don't have to care whether it's a chov or a schus. All we have to care about, it's not bal karchu, it's not against his will.
So strictly speaking, it's not shalom funnel. Like going in, need the funnel.
So we're not dealing with Zachan Yadam Shalom B'Fanav, because eventually it might be Shlichus, and Shlichus doesn't operate by a Katan. So again, when we go back to read the previous line in Tosfos, V'nireh deschia de geris lo dami l'shar schios, what he's saying is that it's not operating midin Zachan Yadam Shalom B'Fanav. Why? Because Bezdin is only being matbil him. And what's happening now? They are supplying the das and Zochim Bavuro. No. It's not that they're Zochim. Einam Zochim Bavuro. Now we have to go back to the previous line in Tosfos and underline the words Einam Zochim Bavuro and reinterpret them. We thought before that Einam Zochim Bavuro means that we're not doing a Maisa on their behalf. No. What he's saying, Einam Zochim Bavuro, means it's not Midin Zechia at all. The only thing that's missing is das. We're going to supply the das. And therefore, Tosa has a problem here. Why does the Gemara say, well, Ovi Kochobev Keredichale, and therefore it's a Chova? We're not operating with Midin Schia. When we're operating Midin Schia, then it has to be a Schos, and he can say it's a Chova. But here, we're not operating Midin Schia.
Why isn't Tosfos bothered by the Gemara's? Forget the answer. The Gemara's answer. The Gemara's question still doesn't make sense. The words Tanina, Tanina.
Does he relate to that man from one of the footnotes? Maybe I don't know. I didn't get a chance to find anyone who said that, but you're right. It's a very valid question. But I'm just trying to work out the Tosfos. Again, that was only in the Havamina, Eli. The Gemara in the Havamina understood that Ger Katan Matbino Saldas Bezdin is based on Zachan Yodam Shalom B'Fanav. The Gemara Lamaskana says no, it's not based on Zachan Yodam Shalom B'Fanav. It can't be, says Tosfos, because it's a Katan, and he doesn't have shlichus. Now the question is, so what is it based on? Is it a new parsha of Zechia? And we're supplying the das on his behalf because of Zachan Yodam, or is it a new parsha of being able to be Megaya the Katan as long as he doesn't object? I don't know if you remember last week, I asked you to look up a piece in the Rambam about in Hilchas Avadim. Did anybody remember that? Anyway, I don't know if we have time now. Please remind me, because it's a very fascinating piece. The Rambam says that there's something called Kavush Tachas Yada, which means, again, this is not something that happened too often in Jewish history, but if the Jews have control and dominion over the Goyim, they can take a Goy and decide to be Megayer. Okay, then? That's a Rambam in Hilchas Avadim.
What, against his will?
Even against his will. He's called Kavush Tachas Yada. And therefore, you see that there's a possibility within the framework of Gerus to be Megayer someone if he's Kavush Tachas Yada. Now, if he's not Kavush Tachas Yada, then it can't be Bal Karcha. But nevertheless, the Gerus will be Chal as long as he doesn't say, I don't want the Gerus. And it seems like we don't even need Das for that Gerus. It's like some sort of magical power that's vested in Bezdin that they could be Megayer. And Tosfos therefore asks, if that's the case, if Bezdin could completely, as we said before, circumvent Zechia, then why do we care whether it's a chov or not? And Tosfos answers, Bishum de im haisa chovaso, lo hayav lebezdin lismatze lahachnis gufo meaning for tefillah, b'davar sheish lo chov. Tosfos is saying that, okay, Bezdin has the authority to be Megayer him as long as it's not Bal Karcha, but they're not going to get involved. The Hismatzus of Bezdin is predicated on the fact that they're doing a good thing on behalf of this guy by making him into a Jew. V'afilu betino de la bardas choshev ger. And he proves it from the Gemara Ksubas over there about Katana Pchusavi Bashamsha, that she has the status of a Giores. And the reason for it is, even though there's no Das, Shazchia bi Atzmo, that the Ger himself goes into the Bikva, Kida Parishis, Shamila Vatfila Bekufa.
From whose perspective? From Destin's perspective or from the guy, from the kid's perspective?
Let me ask you the following question. If Tosfos accepts Zechia, except this new Parsha of Zechia the way we want it interpreted, then if it's a Chova, because an Akum would rather be a guy, he enjoys that Efkerus, then how can we operate Midin Zechia? In other words, why did Tosfos have to give the answer? She'ein lonu lismatze b'dom. Let me argue that yesh lanu lismatze b'dom. Right? There's a problem with, we don't have enough chayalim, so we need some goyim to become chayalim, right? So let's be megayim. Why does Tosfos say ein lanu lismatze b'dom? I don't get it. If we're dealing with zocher the other shlo b'fanav, just tell me that it's critical for us to decide that it's not Hefkerus that he wants, that he'd rather be a Jew giving up on Hefkerus, and it's better for him, and it's his chuz, because there's no such thing as Zocher L'Yot Shlom B'Fanav without chuz. So why does Tosfos have to stretch his arm out to this whole, do a somersault in the air? Ein lanu l'smatze b'dom. Forget about ein lanu l'smatze b'dom. Yesh lanu l'smatze b'dom. I have a more fundamental problem. If an Akum Hefkerus Nichole, then if it's a chova, then there's no din of Zocher L'Yot Shlom B'Fanav. Rabbi said, do you see how I prove that Tosfos is not operating within the parsha of Zocher L'Yot Shlom B'Fanav? Even though we said that you need das for gerus, and now Bezdin has to supply the das, not the Maisa, but the das on behalf of the ger, Tosfos is not operating with that. Tosfos is operating with a brand new halacha in which Bezdin could be Megayer someone without das. It's not that they are supplying the das for the guy. That would operate Midin Zechia, and that would only apply if there's a schos. But Tosfos is saying, if the Akum was Befker Nichle, I got a problem, ain't little Lismatze B'dom. Tosfos has like a secondary kind of, technical issue of ain't little Lismatze B'dom. There's a much more fundamental halachic issue over here. If you're working with Zocher L'Yot Shlom B'Fanav, how could it be meaningful if it's a chova for him? So what is Tosfos racking his brains to try to figure out what does the Gemara mean when it says, well, it's better for a guy to be a guy because of Efkeris? Forget about all that. You don't have to stand on your head and do somersaults in the air to figure that out. I know why the Gemara is saying that. The Gemara is saying because if the Havmin is correct and the Akka would be better off as a guy, then there's no Zocher L'Yot Shlom B'Fanav. Then our supplying das on his behalf through the Parsha of Zocher would not make any sense whatsoever. And if I submit to you, and again, so I'm shooting myself in the feet, in the leg, because this is against everything I've been trying to sell to you tonight, that Tosfos is not operating the way we wanted to operate, Midin Zocher L'Yot. This is not a new category, a new sniff or enough of Zechia that's not predicated on Shlichus because you don't need a Maisa, but Tosfos is operating in a whole different realm. He's talking about the ability to be Megayer someone as long as it's not Bal Karch.
But only Megayer custom. Because the Megayer Gadol we did use here. It's like since the Schia of Gerus, only the Gerus of custom. Gerus of Gadol would be.
But again, if he's the Gadol, then is he coming to Bezdin to be Misgayer? If he's coming on his own volition to be Misgayer, then I don't need Zocher L'Yot Shlom B'Fanav. He's doing it himself from A to Z, from soup to nuts. He's the one who's supplying the das. He's doing the Masechet Gerus. He's already a bar hachi of das. He's a bar das. He's a gadol.
No, we said why can't mean that he takes the source when he becomes a Jew.
No, again, that's only in order to get shlichus. But we don't need shlichus if he comes on his own volition. If he comes on his own 2 feet, we're not going to take a guy who's a gadol and be megayer. Except for the case of kavush tachas yada. That's already a different halach of kavush. Okay.
The case here that we accept
saying unless it's a case where it's al clarify. So because of the fact that he's a ger katan, so he doesn't have das, so he can't, even if he was al clarify, we don't listen to him because he doesn't have das. So therefore we accept it.
And that's going to be the next line in Tosas. Tosas is going to say, "Higdil yicholim limchos." Now he's a la bardas. But what happens when he becomes a bardas? And Tosas says the following. We're going to fast forward here to the last two lines of Tosas. You see where it says "V'afal gav"? V'afal gav damina b'ksubis. Higdil yicholim limchos. Question mark. Right? Afal gav introduced the kasha. What's bothering Tosfos now?
If they don't need
The good, the right side, they look here.
if basic is applied to das, so you're finished, so the ger is ger. So what difference does it make if they're both there?
But again, I ask you the following question. Is Tosfos operating within Zechia?
No.
He can't be. Another proof. If Tosfos is operating within Zechia, then what's bothering him about Higdil Yicholim Limchos? That's simply an application of the general rule that applies to every Zechia, that until the person finds out about it, that you were mizakeh him, and now the Zocher says, well, I don't want it. Thanks, but no thanks. In such a case, Zechia wouldn't operate. So what's bothering Tosfos? Higdil Yicholim Limchos. I don't understand what the Gemara is talking about, because Higdil Yicholim, I'll tell you why Higdil Yicholim Limchos. Because it's based on Zachar Yom Shalom Fana. And if the person makes a macha and he protests, he says, this is not a schus. Very nice that you operated on my man, but I don't want it. So again, what do I prove now? That Tosfos is not operating within Zechia, but rather is a separate halach that Bezdin could be Megayer a Katan. And now Tosfos wants to understand, what does it mean, Higdil Yicholim Limchos? How could they have a schus mecha and protest if we're not operating within Zechia? If Bezdin is Megayer them, then the Geras is Chal. If the Geras is Chal, what difference does it make if he makes a mecha? So what is Tosfos' answer? Rinon dikshegadlu shah achas v'lo michu shuv ein yicholim limchos. We wait for that shah achas, that one moment of time when he becomes a gadol, this katan, and if he doesn't make a mecha, he can never long make a mecha. Now wait a second. Imagine the following scenario. They took this katan, they were matvilim al das bezdin. He's a ger l'chol dover. As Tosfos says before, we can marry him off to Israel and so forth. And he becomes a gadol. What does he do when he becomes a gadol? He fulfills the mitzvahs, am I right? He doesn't even know that he's a ger. Nobody even told him that he's a ger. What's going to happen when he finds out he's a ger? And he says, I don't want it. Again, Zachir the other slow b'fanu. I'm mizaka you, and you're Zoch. You don't know that I didn't. When are you going to find out about it? Could be 20 years down the line you'll find out about it. Whenever you find out about it, that's when you'll make a decision and you'll let us know whether for you it's a schus or it's a chova. Why is it Higdil sha'achas v'lo michu shuv einam yicholim limchos?
I'm not sure it means that.
I don't know what you mean, Eli, but it sounds fancy.
A certain amount of time has to pass afterwards.
No, you say,
Well, can't you go if he doesn't know about it?
Not sure Tosfos would say that even if he didn't know.
Well, that's your classic case. I don't know if Tosfos thinks otherwise. He should have told me that. Your classic case of ger katan means that for the last 13 years since he was born, he's been acting as a Jew. He's being raised as a Jew. He doesn't know he's a ger. And, there's a famous tshuva, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, he wants to know if when a ger katan becomes bar mitzvah age, do we have to notify him that he was a ger in order to give him the option of rejecting his gerus? And Rabbi Moshe comes to the conclusion that we don't even have to notify him. And Igdilu Sha'achas, he continues to live a life as a Jew, is Shuveni Yachal Limchos. He's a full-fledged ger. We can't do anything to undermine that gerus. So once again, Rabbosai, we see over and over again that Tosfos is not operating the din Zachar Li'Odom Shlo B'Fanav. Because if it was Zachar Li'Odom Shlo B'Fanav, even 20 years down the line, he could say, I don't want to be a Jew. When he finds out that this whole thing was done, but he was born John Paul Jones or whatever it is. But now Rabbosai have a problem. Because I don't understand exactly how this Machal works. If we're saying that there's a power invested in Besdin, that Besdin can be Megayer, this Katan, even without Das, then what's Machal?
So this explains the next one.
Okay, good, very good. I didn't see the next line. No, I'm just joking with you. But what I mean to say is that if we're working with Tzchia, I understand Igdil Yichol and Limchos, but if we're not operating with Tzchia, what's Igdil Yichol and Limchos?
It could be a conditional task.
So Tosfos adds 2 words here. Which 2 words? Kabbalas mitzvahs. Very interesting. As long as the Katan is a Katan, and he's a Labar Das, he's not capable of Kabbalas ol mitzvahs. Now that he becomes a Gadol, he's capable of Kabbalas ol mitzvahs. Let's read it inside. He says, Misha Gadlu, Sha'achas lo bichu shuv einam yicholim limchos demoil lehu milu tefila shel katnus shel haisa begufam v'ein chaserim el kabbalas mitzvahs umitoch shegadlu v'lo michu hainu kabbalah.
And he can't go back after.
And he can't go back after that. Why? Because once he's a ger, is to paraphrase the Gemara in the Durham about Hevish, gerus lo poka bichti. Gerus can't just evaporate. Now, if gerus can't evaporate? Let's call a spade a spade. We're saying that he needs Kabbalas ol mitzvahs. If he needs Kabbalas ol mitzvahs, then what happens to the gerus when he becomes a gadol? It falls apart because he makes a machah and he's not willing to makabel his gerus. I got a problem with that. For the last 13 years, we've been considering him what? A Jew. Now, all of a sudden, the gerus is gone because he makes a machah. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, but
How could a Jew become a god? I understand that a guy can become a Jew. Like Rabbi Ovadia Yosef says, an Ashkenazi can become a Sephardi. But you can't do it the other way around, says Rabbi Ovadia. A Sephardi can't become an Ashkenazi. Okay, that was just on the side. That's true. But I'm saying something else. He became a Jew. We were Megayer him. Now you're telling me you need Kabbalas mitzvahs. Okay, he doesn't want to be Makabel mitzvahs. So what happens? His gerus is gone. His Kedushas Yisrael is Paka B'chti. It just evaporates into thin air.
So
How does that work?
If it was Mitam Zatia, retroactively, the whole gerus turns out to be invalid. But now that
Correct. Again, if Tosfos operated, we did Schia, but then it wouldn't be Sha'achas. As we said, who cares about Sha'achas? Tosfos is saying, well, you know what? He doesn't know about his gerus. That's fine. What happened when he came a Bardas? He continues in the way of mitzvahs. If he continues doing mitzvahs, Tosfos says that's exactly what? That's Kabbalah's gerus. So what are we going to say if he doesn't want to continue mitzvahs? He finds out about the gerus and he says, I don't want to be a ger. And we didn't even have one, he didn't even wear tefillin once from the time he became a gadol. Not once. So what happens now, Rabbi Osai?
Worth it.
maybe,
Come on, I need one word, Rabbi Osai. Can you help me out here? One word. Starts with a lamed, ends with an ayin. As a feminine. It has to be Oker, the gerus Mafreya. This gerus was predicated on a false premise. We thought that this guy, when he becomes a Jew, is going to be Makabel mitzvahs. We thought that we're going to train him. He's going to enjoy being a Jew. Well, what's that famous song that's very popular now? Geschmack Zayin Yid. I was at a wedding 2 weeks ago in America. They sang that twice. a band will never repeat the same song twice at a chassid. It's chok v'lo yav, except for Geschmack zu seiner Yid. Okay, because it's so popular. I don't know, here in Israel, I don't know, but in America, it's very popular. So we're assuming it's Geschmack zu seiner Yid, then he'll definitely continue for the rest of his life ad me'er v'yesrim, fulfilling the mitzvahs. But now we find out, hey, what, you know what, buddy? We had a condition in the Gerus. It was almanas shehu yekayves mitzvahs. And now we find out that we made a boo-boo, we made a mistake. It turns out he doesn't want to do the mitzvahs. Is the entire Gerus was predicated on an error, and it's batel mafreya, because there's no other way. Any other way of explaining it, in my mind, is suicide. It's impossible. You can't tell me that all of a sudden he becomes a gadol, he decides he doesn't want his Gerus, and a Jew for 13 years, the Kedushas Yisrael is Pakai, just goes up in smoke. So it's going to have to be L'mafre. Okay, fine. So we need Kabbalah Sol Mitzvahs. Where's the Kabbalah Sol Mitzvahs? In Gerus, we need a Bezdin. In Gerus, we need that the Mila and the Tefillah take place in the presence of Bezdin. And for example, at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, we needed not just Mila and Tefillah, but also what? Carbon. And the carbon had to be in front of Bezdin. Every segment of Gerus to generate the Gerus requires Bezdin. And if I'm not mistaken, check me out. Open up to, we have Masifta, so we don't have Daf Beis, do we? Anyway, if you open up to Daf Beis in Sanhedrin, I believe it says over there that Gerus requires Bezdin, I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a while. What about Kabbalah Sol Mitzvahs? Does he have to be Makabal Mitzvahs in front of Bezdin? Absolutely not. Why? Because what do we need? All we need is not a formal Kabbalah Sol Mitzvahs in front of Bezdin like every other Maisam guy. We just have to know that when we were being Magayer him, we did so on the right premises. We were correct in our premise that he is going to be dedicated to the life of Shmiras HaMitzvahs. And what's the proof? Because Igdilu. And what happened Igdilu? He doesn't know he's a ger, but he continued doing what? Mitzvahs. The very moment he continues doing mitzvahs, we have now certified that he wanted, that we made the right decision, that he wants to go in the way of the Torah. And that his tacit Kabbalah Sol Mitzvahs is there. If we would need an active, formal Kabbalah Sol Mitzvahs, then we would require Bezdin. But we don't need that. We've been working with a premise, and the premise motivated us to be Magayer him, that namely he's going to continue in the way of the Torah. It was Almanas Shu Yishmar Sabitzas that we Magayer him. And sure enough, when he becomes a gadol, he continues with one mitzvah. And one mitzvah is enough to convince us. Now, once we're convinced, then there's no possibility of being Oker the Geris L'Mafreya, because he has Kedushas Yisrael, and therefore Higdilu Sha'achas V'lo Micha Shuv Eidi Yochel Limchos. Again, as he said before, it's not operating with Zechiyah, otherwise he can be Mocha. He finds out 20 years down the line that he's a ger, and he says, you know what, I don't want it. Meaningless. Sha'achas. The Sha'achas clinches the gerus that took place when he was a Katan. We don't need a new gerus. We cannot be Mavatal the gerus. The Kedushas Yisrael is complete the very moment when he becomes a gadol and he continues to do mitzvahs. I mean, the only thing that bothers me, honestly, is which mitzvahs does he do? If he puts on tefillin, that's one thing. But if he crosses the old lady across the street, which is what the Rav Sadia calls it a mitzvah sichlis, so I don't know exactly if that's going to convince us that he's going to go the way of a Jew. I don't know. But let's leave that question on the side. Whatever he does as a Jew. He's Mekayim a mitzvah. When he becomes a gadol, that one single mitzvah is enough to guarantee that our gerus, which we performed on behalf of this child 13 years ago, is a valid gerus, and his kedusha still is complete.
How do you know that it's doing one mitzvah is enough? The Gemara is talking about whether he's micha. There's a difference between not being moche and doing one mitzvah. I mean,
correct. What I'm saying is that not being moche, how does that supply? Tosafos says you need kabbalas. What's the language? Tosafos kabbalas mitzvahs. Okay, so he wasn't moche. Is that kabbalas mitzvahs? Tosus means something else by Kabbalah's mitzvahs. Tosus means that it shouldn't be a rejection of mitzvahs. As long as he doesn't reject the mitzvahs, which is called mecha, then that's considered Kabbalah's mitzvahs. If we would require Kabbalah's mitzvahs formally, then what would it mean when Tosus says, Higdilu sha'achas? Well, okay, sha'achas. So what? Where's the Kabbalah's own mitzvahs? And when he finds out that he's a ger, he rejects his gers. Why shouldn't that be meaningful? No. Higdilu sha'achas. And that's considered a Kabbalah's mitzvahs. Obviously, Kabbalah's mitzvahs is the absence of a macha, which means that he continues as a Jew observing the mitzvahs. And if he does so, then his gerus is clinched. L'mafreya, we validate his gerus, and he has Kedusha Yisrael, which he had already from the time he was a child, an infant, and lo paka b'chti, will never dissipate into thin air. But if higdilu, and he is mocha, which means as soon as he's a bardas, he says, these mitzvahs are not for me. Thank you, but I'm not interested in the mitzvahs. Then he gloy milsal mafreya that the gerus that we instituted and implemented was not a valid gerus. It's okay, the gerus mafreya. Otherwise, again, as I said, I use the word suicide. It's a very hard word, but I can't tolerate in my mind the possibility that you can take a ger and he's a Jew, and then all of a sudden, poof, he ceases to be a Jew. Gerus works only in one direction, not in the other direction. How are we doing on the clock? Okay, so let's just make a summary of where we're holding now. I think what we want to do a little bit next week, if it's okay with you, is this business about kavush tachas yado. And I think I notified you where to find it in the Rambam and also in Rabbi Reichman's book on Masechet Yevamis.
Oh, we have it on the picture of it here, though.
Yeah, somebody took, Ari, did you take, you took a picture of it? Okay, so that I would like to discuss with you. And then in Mr. Hashem, we'll finish the toast. Okay, then?
Go ahead.
Now, also one more. We definitely should. You bring the schnapps. Now, I just want to say one thing. I'm at a crossroads here. I don't know whether or not we should learn the sugis kiseden. I prefer, but again, I don't want to do without your approval, because I prefer that we don't go through the sugis tediously, line by line. And if you rely on me with a little bit of emunas, whatever, I can't say chachamim, but emunah, what I'm going to do is I might, fast forward a little bit in the sugis in order to focus on what I think are the main sugis in this paragraph. Is that okay? Okay. I don't think it'll be relevant to next week, but it will be relevant the week after, I think. So I'll notify you what sugya we're going to be focusing our attention. Okay, then? All right. Everyone should have a great week.
Thank you. There's a machlokes with Katan